people are not educated about what is value creation. How do I actually solve problems? How do I sell myself and my unique abilities? That's something that's a very, very new thing and is completely different than how people thought about how to succeed in the old world.
Because of all this technology, the environment is changing so fast, and the other jobs that don't involve this creative thinking and using that specific knowledge, they're getting replaced by large language models.
Where is this money coming from and why is it being spent in the way that it is? People are paying for Bo Burnham's what he's providing because he is using his specific knowledge to create something that nobody else can create. A lot of people these days are not happy with what we call capitalism and are seeing a lot of kind of harmful effects of what, corporations are doing and these social media platforms, and for good reason. I mean, I think that there's definitely a lot of downsides and
inequality.
Negative externalities that can definitely be addressed and talked about. And one such person, we are big Bo Burnham fans, and one of his songs, Art is Dead, he kind of talks about how there are problems with the kind of performing and entertainment industry that
I slept late while you worked at the drugstore.
Of all of this money you worked really hard for, I slept in late while you worked at the drugstore.
Whereas he's getting all this money from his shows, from just being the center of attention. And while other people are working so hard to get just a small fraction of what he's getting.
Yeah, and then he feels bad that people are giving him their money, when he's getting all this money, and then they are working in these other things. And so part of and he's more broadly expressed kind of not being very happy with kind of how I guess just it seems to be indicating with capitalism more generally, but that just kind of more broadly, that's been some of the views that he's expressed. And we kind of wanted to talk a little bit about
addressing the capitalism thoughts specifically.
Well, addressing people's thoughts on capitalism, and then also separately those specific issues, because I feel like what's missed is that people will kind of have opinions more broadly on kind of these very, very broad terms like capitalism, or a company, to even say X company is doing this. That company doesn't actually exist. It's a fictional concept. Yuval Noah Harari talks about this in Sapiens, where it's America doesn't exist. It's just a bunch of dirt on the ground. And then we decided to draw a line on a map. The line doesn't actually exist.
Money isn't valuable.
Right,
the only
they're just green pieces
value
of paper.
is a bookmark, but we decide to put this value on it, but it's a social construct.
Yeah, and so companies don't actually exist. It's just a social construct, and what a company is a bunch of people working together. And so to say the X company is doing this, that company isn't doing anything. It's a bunch of people doing things, and same for capitalism. When you have an economy, all that is a bunch of people doing things and trading goods and services and being able to produce things. And so it's kind of, when it comes to what capitalism, when people talk about the downsides of capitalism, I feel like what I really want to emphasize is that the downsides of capitalism are, the weaknesses of capitalism are the weaknesses in human nature. Because all capitalism really means
is just freedom.
It's just giving humans the freedom to produce what they want, to buy what they want, to decide, how much to sell it for, right? And
then the incentives will shape these so-called companies and businesses and how much and what these are doing and how they are using your minds and your and what you're actually buying. So with these days, probably the most sought after resource is people's attention. So no wonder these video games are so addictive. And no wonder these social media platforms are so addictive. If the incentive is getting people's attention, because if you get people's attention, then you'll make money. But it's not about the company itself being inherently evil. It's the it's the incentives that shape it. So you want to understand that to really grasp why it's causing these problems.
Yeah, and one thing about, so if the weaknesses of capitalism are the weaknesses of human nature, what human nature really has over these planned systems is potential. That's what I really see as how we can take advantage of this and stop focusing so much on how, like, oh yeah, there's definitely like negative externalities and things bad that are happening, but being able to focus more constructively on how can we make the most of what we have here, because that freedom comes with a lot of opportunity. And that's what you have when people talk about, you know, because all of these economies are on a spectrum of planned to free economies, where, you know, you on the very extreme you have it where like the government is you know, planning everything in terms of what is being produced, who is producing it, how much does it cost, who is getting it. All of those questions are being answered by the government in a extreme planned economy, and then the opposite for capitalism and what people talk about when it comes to that. But all these countries are in between, because it's a spectrum.
Yeah.
You know, the U.S. has regulations on what people can do to protect workers and to protect some of these negative externalities that
also
can be exploited when it comes to like people in vulnerable positions.
Yeah.
Right? That's like what child labor laws are doing and
Yeah.
all sorts of things. So when it comes to entrepreneurship, that's really what comes to this. When it comes to inequality, a lot of it is that people's power is leveraged. When you have leverage, that's when you have these extreme outcomes for certain individuals. So when it comes to the CEOs of these huge companies, every decision they make is leveraged across the millions of people working for them, right? And that's something that was in the past, a lot more harder to access, because entrepreneurship before the software revolution was something that was only accessible to people who already had a lot of capital. You know, in order for you to start a business, it had to be a physical business where like either you're like producing cars or something, and then you need factories and you need to hire people, and then all of that costs a lot of capital. But now more and more you can start a company with nothing. You know, you can, with just a computer and an internet connection, you can make an app, and that can be reached to millions of people. You can leverage yourself through software. And so because of that, being able to have that leverage effect is accessible to almost everybody. And so that's...
And you can make a lot of money from something like that.
Oh yeah, and that's something that's a big change from previously, from when it comes to looking at this entrepreneurial environment. And yet we are still seeing a lot of inequality, and I do think that a lot of this comes down to education and understanding what value creation actually is. Because one thing that Bo Burnham talks about in his song was how, you know, he's saying that, like, you know, I slept in late while you're working at the drugstore, and like these people are working so hard. But the problem is understanding, like, where is this money coming from, and why is it being spent in the way that it is? People are paying for Bo Burnham's, like, you know,
because he's irreplaceable.
And all of what he's providing, because he is using his specific knowledge to create something that nobody else can create. You know, even though like there are other people doing musical comedy and doing similar sorts of things, nobody can do it in the way that he is doing it, because he is using his specific knowledge, which is what something Naval Ravikant talks about, something that is learned but not taught. It's something that's unique to you based on your circumstances, you know, all of your experiences and your face, your voice, you know, your own, you know, creative output in terms of how, you know, you can uniquely provide, you know, something that nobody else can provide in the way that you do.
But that's not the same thing for people working at the drugstore, people working at Walmart.
The person working at the drugstore can be replaced, not because they're a replaceable human being, it's because that job can be replaced. And I feel like what really creates that accessibility towards being able to succeed is that person at the drugstore being able to understand what is it about them that makes them unique, that they can provide. But a lot of people aren't thinking that way, because that's a very new way of thinking about value creation in this digital world. Most people are not educated about what is value creation? How do I actually solve problems? How do I sell myself and my unique abilities? That's something that's a very, very new thing, and is completely different than how people thought about how to succeed in the old world, which was about getting a degree and having a, secure career where you're going to do the same thing for the rest of your life. When now, like, all these industries are constantly being disrupted. You have to keep learning. You have to keep growing. And so I feel like a lot of what people are looking at is some of these negative externalities that are in some ways, definitely still relevant today. You're still seeing some of those things, but I feel like the real disconnect is not that there's no opportunity. The real disconnect is the lack of, education, being able to help people take advantage of
lack of awareness of that opportunity, because because of all this technology, it's been changing so fast. The environment is changing so fast, and people have this opportunity, and the other jobs that don't involve this creative thinking and using that specific knowledge, they're getting replaced by robots. They're getting replaced by large language models. And so what are you going to do? Well, you're going to use that specific knowledge if you want to if you want to use that part that's irreplaceable, then yes, you can make a lot of money. It's not even about the money. You're creating something that's actually valuable, and people are going to want it, whether it's money or it's relationships or it's any kind of capital. You're gaining something because that's what people want. That's what makes you different from everyone else. And you want to use that because it's actually a lot of fun. Like that is what is very natural. It's not very natural to do the same thing every single day, and do something that you're not at all excited about.
Well, I also want to address the luck aspect of this and the landscape of current social media, because in an interview, Bo Burnham was also talking about, like, somebody asked the question, like, what would you suggest for other young people who want to be, like, famous like you and doing what you're doing? And he's
I must have a lot of young people that say, Bo, how do I get into the business? How do I accomplish what you've accomplished? What's your advice for young people?
I'd say, well, you got to just take a deep breath and give up. The system is rigged against you. Your hard work and talent will not pay off.
He's saying, give up because I got lucky, and, like, this is not something that you should count on. And to be fair, that's definitely true given the current landscape of social media. If you're trying to make money being a famous YouTuber, like, that's just very, very, very low probability that's going to work out for you. And even if it does, it means you're, like, slaving away constantly trying to, like, beat the algorithm. That's not a good path to try to pursue.
There's so many people trying to become a celebrity or an influencer. But that's not the only road that involves using your specific knowledge.
It's really about like in which medium are you actually trying to compete in, and these traditional social media platforms are just so. It's just kind of rigged against you in the sense that, like, you're competing against so many people, and every single post is just in the same sort of, like, category, and it's one in which you don't have any kind of real edge there. Like, there's just so many that the market is so, saturated, and it's not even something that's probably going to make you very happy or fulfilled to try to do some of that. What we're really talking about in terms of the opportunity in this digital world is that if you find 1,000 people that are willing to pay you $100 a year, you can make a living for yourself, right? And that 1,000 people, that's not a very big following, when it comes to, like, social media, but they're not followers. They're core users. They're people who actually care about your product or care about you and care about what you're providing.
People that you're engaging with directly.
Yes, people, a lot of it is that, when it comes to these social media platforms and doing some of what, Bo Burnham was doing, because he was talking about, like, just, when you're doing the kinds of things, when you're just creating this content and you're just providing it for people to consume, and it's just kind of a one-way direction, that's something that you can just get very like isolated and just not be very happy in that sort of environment, because you can see the views, you can see the likes, you can see the comments, but you're not actually engaging with these people in a meaningful way.
Yeah.
And that's not really something that's going to be super fulfilling at the end of the day. You're going to be excited about being famous for a while, and then it's going to wear off, and you're just going to be sitting alone in your room like, what happened?
Yeah.
And so I think that a lot of what this new kind of value creation looks like is not anything like what we're seeing now. It's not like what you're seeing us doing right now, or we're communicating in a one-way direction too, but it's towards the goal of bringing people in to a more community-like environment, where then we can try to provide things that we can uniquely bring, and we don't want millions of people for that. We want maybe, a few hundred, like at max, like, you can't engage with that many people, right? And so it's really thinking about, what do you really want to provide? And then how do you find the people that are at the end of the distribution in terms of really, really interested in that, right? And when you find those people, then you just want to listen to them and think about, how can I make them really happy so they're willing to pay me $100 a year, right? Because if you're thinking about how can I succeed with that, the hardest path you can take is trying to get like 1 million people to pay you $1. It's way easier to get 1,000 people to pay you $100, right? And so I feel like the traditional social media path is nothing like kind of what we're thinking about in terms of this new opportunity that has arisen from, I guess you could say capitalism, because we're still operating in a more free economy, but is changing with the sort of digital incentives, because people are tired of this traditional social media where they're scrolling. People know that they're depressed. People know that they're anxious. People know that this is not working.
Yeah.
Right? And that's why people are seeking out more personalized connections. People are seeking out, who is it out there who is providing what I really need? Who is out there that I really want to engage with and actually get to know? People are asking these questions, and I think that this is kind of a regime change from the previous mode of value creation with these huge, traditional social media platforms that didn't result in real connection. And that's a big part of what we're trying to do with our platform, is how do we actually create something that is suited for this new mode of value creation, because this is a value creation that actually brings fulfillment, that actually brings connection, and actually gives everybody an opportunity to really try to find success for themselves, because they're not trying to be an outlier. They're just trying to find meaningful connections with people who actually want what they can bring.